Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining Cybersecurity here on the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. This is Sean Martin, your host, where I have the fortune of connecting with people from all over the place to look at how we can operationalize security and do it in a way that not only protects the revenue that we generate, but actually helps companies create some of that revenue in the first place, being more efficient and wise in their risk management procedures and efforts. So you know the show if you're listening to listened for a while. I go all over the place. Today we're going to look at a role that I think a lot of you will be interested in, especially with some of the news that's been happening, and that's where CISOs don't always win. May not make the best choices, may not have the best support, may not get the results that they were anticipating. We can talk about it all different ways, but failure is the one summation of all of that. And for those that follow me on LinkedIn, you probably saw that I've written a few blogs in this. It's a 4-part blog. I'm holding on the 4th part, but it's why am I wrong for not wanting to be a CISO is the name of the series. So I talk a lot about the challenges and the opportunity to fail in those posts. But today I'm happy to have a conversation with Malcolm Harkins, and we're gonna talk about some of his learnings and experience in the industry and connections with others in the field, and we'll touch on some news things, I'm sure, as well. Malcolm, it's great to have you on.
Thanks, Sean. Happy to be here.
And I think you've one thing that's a constant is change, right? So the CISO role a few years ago looks different than it does decades ago, and tomorrow's going to look different than today. And speaking of change, you've been on the move yourself, doing some cool new things. So why don't you, if you don't mind, take a moment and give folks an update on what you're up to these days.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sean. So I recently joined a company called HiddenLayer, winner of the 2023 RSA Conference Sandbox Innovation Award. Company was launched almost 2 years ago, give or take a little bit. Just closed its A round of funding. We're in the space of protecting people's advantage, protecting their artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I'm excited to be, again, on the bleeding edge of not only the explosive growth of AI in the world, but going to something near and dear to my heart, because I've always worried about the implications of compromised AI and machine learning and how it could be weaponized in different ways, how it could be manipulated for malicious purposes in different ways. And while we've seen that explosive growth, we've also seen a wide variety of different ways to breach and manipulate artificial intelligence, and traditional controls don't work. And so it's great to be at that kind of edge of new controls and the edge of new technologies to again do what I have my trademark tagline: protect to enable people, data, and business.
I love it. We think alike there, Malcolm, for sure. And you have a long history in bringing new and advanced and, funny enough, AI enabled protections again to market. And yeah, I mean, I've followed you along through the years, and it's always amazing to see the good things you work on and all that you do for the community. So, again, thanks for having me on, or joining me. Maybe it feels like your show. Sure. So as many times it happens, the conversation is inspired by a post, typically on LinkedIn, and this is no different. I follow you there. You did a post back in August. We finally got around to chatting about it now, but the title of it is it time to accept that the current role of the CISO has failed? And it was around this time that I started to put the series of posts together that I was working on as well. And I thought, let's have a good chat. So tell me first off, what was the impetus for putting that together? Was it an event? Was it an aha moment? Was it you overheard something from somebody and you thought, I need to get this off my chest now? What drove you
Yeah,
to put
great
those
question.
words
So,
on the screen there?
well, so go back in time. I've actually said for many years that the security industry has failed as an industry itself. And some of that is because of the economic incentives, because a lot of security companies, not all, but a lot, and certainly traditional ones who've been around for a long time, profit from the insecurity of computing, right? They make money the more risk that exists. And in some cases, they wait till the risk has manifested itself long enough that they can profit from it before they go solve it and bake it into existing solutions. And we've seen that over and over again. I think, again, the startup community is holding, I'd say, the traditional players much more accountable to really being, hopefully more innovative versus kind of milking their cash cows, which we've seen for years. Now getting to the CISO side of it, and the post, there was actually a post that I read from somebody else that had talked about the CISO's role has failed, and they went on to talk about it's too complex and we got too many of this and too many of that and too many of this, all these things, and I'm like, that stuff annoys me. I'm like, quit whining. You know what? If you want a C-suite job, you want a C-suite title, you want a C-suite pay grade, well, guess what? Suck it up and do the damn job. And that means deal with the complexities, deal with the liabilities, deal with the responsibilities, and deliver an outcome, right? And so now some of that, when you start clicking down and you go, has there been failures in the CISO role, or as I define it, Chief Security and Trust Officer, because I define it wider than the typical CISO role that nests under the CIO. Um, you know, for me, if you go back to basics, what is failure? It's a social concept, meaning that you did not meet desired or intended outcomes, right? That's the definition of failure. So you look at it and you go, okay, well, if a CISO has failed, what outcomes didn't they deliver on, right? Or what intended objectives? And sometimes it is the CISO and their team that didn't meet objectives. Other times it is the organization itself, CEO, CFO, general counsel, that the board, the organizational inertia that agreed for you to hit a set of objectives, but frankly didn't fund you or allow you to actually do it. Right? So you have two things that could potentially drive the failure. And sometimes when you have a combination of both, a company that will, I'll be really blunt, give lip service to saying security is important and all this stuff, but frankly doesn't give a crap. And the CEO will get up or CIO will get up during Cybersecurity Awareness Month and do the rah cybersecurity stuff, and then go back to their office and then go, why are we doing this crap? And that's a low risk. And you security team, you don't know what you're doing. You're getting in the way. I mean, that happens, right? But there's also cases where, again, truly the security team and or the leader has failed to define the right objectives and has failed to achieve it within the construct of the budget and time they were given. And that's clearly, in my mind, a failure of the CISO.
Yep. Yep. And I know we want to talk about the three angles: the individual, the organization, which you kind of alluded to a bit there, and also the industry, because I've seen a couple of the the comments, and one from Rick McElroy, where what does he say? I think we haven't achieved the success we all wanted, but I don't know. It's a complete failure, is what he started off with there. Um, and, and what you described and that point from Rick makes me think we didn't know in the early days what success was. So we were just kind of going and doing and setting a bar, sharing that bar with others, sharing learnings with others. And I think we've reached a point now where the role is mature. But do we have a clear common understanding of what success looks like so that we can then say, no, we didn't achieve it? Or is
Well,
that still all over the place? What do you think?
I think it's still all over the place. So I've asked this question a lot of peers for years. I mean, I've been in this area for now 22 years here in another few weeks. I've asked repeatedly over and over again, what is your design goal for your security program? What is your design goal? And people go, well, I want to achieve SOC 2 compliance, or I want to achieve NIST CSF 3.7 out of 5, or I want to achieve, a hygiene level of patching 99% of the systems 99% of the time in our allotted SLA, right? And I go,
I want a green
those are,
dashboard.
yeah, exactly. And I'm like, those are measures of motion, not measures of progress. And in some of those compliance standards, while I adhere to them, like them in some ways, hate them in other ways, they are not a design goal to achieve an outcome, right? If we were building a building in California, we would have to meet a certain earthquake seismic rate for the earth to shake, for the building not to collapse. That's a design goal, right? If I want to drive a car and go from 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds, that's a design goal. Or braking in a certain time period, that's a design goal. Crash test ratings for car, design goal. My design goal when I landed to run security and business continuity in the Intel IT organization 22 years ago, I'm a former finance guy, cash is king, spending money on security didn't add to Intel's net income, right?
Yeah.
I had one primary goal and then a couple secondary goals. The primary goal was no material or significant event. That was job one. And doing that at the least total cost of controls with the least amount of friction and impediments on business velocity, right? So you look at it and you go, 22 years ago, that was my goal. And I knew that as a former finance person. And look at where the SEC is now going. Well, we got to talk about materiality. I'm like, look, it's always been about materiality. But you ask most CISOs what their design goal is, and they are not either able or willing to say, my design goal is no material or significant events that would impact my shareholders, my stakeholders, or my customers. That should be number one design goal. Second design goal, which again, when I got silence, we're a security company, right? We're supposed to be protecting those who can't protect themselves. Well, guess what? That means I had to go above and beyond that design goal. You know what my second design goal was? Only a nation state actor should ever be able to get in, and they have to work for it. The equivalent of saying, I've got a safe, and how long will my contents last at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit? Guess what? Those are the type of design goals that we should be setting. Then we can actually figure out if we succeeded or failed. Now, a different company might go, material events are fine. Okay, well, what type of events are okay? And what type of threat actor is okay to get in, and how easy should we make it for them? Those are the design goals and standards we should be setting. And without doing that, it becomes really hard to judge, did you succeed or fail in any situation. Yet I know I can go back and say where I succeeded and where I failed because I know what my design goals are.
No, I don't know that I've heard it lately, but it certainly was a mantra. I think maybe I heard it a couple weeks ago, but it's certainly been a mantra for years that it's not if, but when, right? No such thing as 100% security.
But that's
And
true of everything. You can't eliminate risk. You can't eliminate it
right.
physically. You can't eliminate it logically. You can't eliminate it in the financial markets, right? So there's no risk-free world. But what you can do is become really close to eliminating the potential of material impact if you've designed your control environment appropriately.
So I have a feeling we're going to go a place I love because around risk management. Because what you're describing there is setting a goal, painting a painting a path to achieve that goal, and mitigating risk and dancing around ambiguity to get there, right?
Exactly. I'm
So
like, look, there's, you look at it and you go, there's three dynamics. What risk, at what cost, at what potential impediment to business velocity? And you go, okay, well, I don't want to impede the business that much, but I will if it means I'm going to mitigate a material impact. And then the question just becomes how much money you are capable of spending. And this becomes a challenge with a lot of people, particularly the past 20 months or so, right? There's been studies that said CISO's budgets have been growing unchecked. I get more money, more people, more this, more that. And guess what? The past 20 months, that went away. Growth of the security spending in many organizations flattened or went down. I talked to a lot of peers. They didn't know how to deal with a budget cut. I always did because I'm like, am I, you know, will this create a material event? No. Well, guess what? I can accept that risk. Why? Because the design goal says no material significant events. Anything less than that is an operational issue, and we'll deal with it when and if it comes.
it begs a question for me, and I kind of pull back to a couple conversations. We had one with Steve Katz and one with Roland Cloutier, where this idea of not just one CISO, but many CISOs specialized in different things, right? I think I actually wrote another post on this point as well. And so, what I'm wondering is if we're being asked to do something that we, being the CISO, asked to do something that we're not good at, should should that goal be defined for us with enough detail that we know what we need to achieve? Other
Does
because it seems to me that if we set it ourselves, we kind of have a picture. We work up to that goal in my mind, right? Based on what we think we can do. I don't know.
Yeah, but when you start doing that, I think the goal, and again, I know what my goals are. I know, but again, somebody could define a slightly different goal, but I think you have to have a goal that's of the nature of what I talked about, right? You might say, hey, as long as the script kiddie doesn't get in, that's good enough. Okay, well, if that's your design goal, great. But calibrate on those things with the organization, right? CEO, CFO, general counsel, and board. It's a bi-directional goal setting process, right? But I think, and I know from my own truth of how I approach the role, you don't have multiple general counsels in a company. You don't have
Right.
multiple CFOs in a company. You don't have multiple CEOs in a company. So if we have to have multiple CISOs so that we can specialize, then guess what? We're not a C suite role. And that means me as an individual doesn't have the capacity to sit at that level. Okay, that's fine. Some people don't have it. Great.
Well,
Find the
we see
person
the
who can
inflated
act like the
inflated
CFO.
roles all the time, right? And is this a result of that? I mean, we see VPs of marketing and VPs of engineering and VPs of sales that are fresh out of high school, right? Running a startup, but they have the title.
There
I'm
is
being a
title
little overzealous
inflation.
with my example, but
Yeah, there is title inflation in some companies. And in some organizations, but it doesn't necessarily have to be startups. I've seen title inflation and, frankly, public companies that have gotten bought. I mean, look at, my background at Intel. Intel had 100 and some thousand people when I was there. You know how many VPs and above there were? 300. When Intel acquired McAfee, there was what, 8,000 employees. You know how many VPs and above there were? Like 500. You go, okay, different companies will have a different level of what I'll say title inflation.
Yep. Yep. So help us understand then, Malcolm. Let's make the large assumption that some goals are defined. You may question them, how they're articulated and whatnot, and maybe we touch on that as well. But let's assume something is there. Where does it break down then? Is it actually in architecting or designing, or do we get swept up with vendor talk and we try to put all stuff together that we're told we should buy, or where do things break down?
Well, for me, it breaks down when. So let's just take any one of the recent breaches in the news. That doesn't mean they failed. I've had systems that get popped and issues, and even I wrote a paper on materiality earlier this year where I disclosed and explained how Intel was the first company that disclosed a cyber incident because it was potentially material under existing Sarbanes-Oxley law in 2010, right? So I look at it and I go, I think we failed when we haven't had the right dialogues, when we have succumbed to the pressure to water down, whitewash, or somehow dilute the portrait of risk. I also did a thing on integrity back a couple years ago, and even polled a number of CISOs. 76% of us said that we've been pressured to water down or dilute the portrait of risk to executives. When we do that, we've failed. Right? So for me, the CISO has failed when they are lacking integrity in what they're doing and how they're doing it. You can have breaches and maintain integrity of the role and not fail. But if you don't hold your integrity intact, you will absolutely fail. Fail your customers, fail yourself, fail your shareholders.
Is that a clear line, or is there? I mean, to me, when you start talking ethics and integrity, it's pretty straight. But who the heck knows? That's why I'm asking. Is it a
Well,
clear
I think
line, or are there
there
gray
there's
areas?
I think there are the reality is there are gray areas. There are times where I've stuck a stake in the ground on a risk issue and I will not budge. I've done it at every organization, every CIO reported to, every CEO, both in every company. But along the path, you might learn that your data or your logic is missing components. That when you're saying no to a business unit GM, and they're like, well, I disagree with you, it's low risk. No, this is high risk. Okay, well, risk is in the eye of the beholder. Well, if I'm the risk arbitrator and I'm the person that's supposed to be the most expert in determining the risk, then my perspective should, by and large, be taken and overrule other perspectives. Having said that, there are times where when you're walking that path, you learn something new from others, which is why risk calibration, risk dialogue, and that doesn't mean you're necessarily watering down the portrait of risk, but if your data and logic are there and you say that it's a critical risk that needs to be addressed and has material impact, and you understand the attack path to that exposure, and the company disagrees with you, I think your obligation is to walk all the way up, including to the board, if it's a potential material issue. Now, you might get overruled. Okay, I can disagree and commit for some things. There's other things I will not disagree and commit on. And I'll put my badge on the table and say, you're wrong.
Take
And I'm
one or
not
the
going to
other.
go along with this. And I'm willing to risk my job and risk my career. No different than a CFO saying, through the accounting and all this stuff, we can't account for things this way. And the CEO or business unit GM says, well, but I want to. Well, who's supposed to be in charge of financial integrity? The CFO. Who's supposed to be in charge of the integrity of our cybersecurity state? We are. That's why again, former finance person, I operate the role that way because I grew up in finance.
I love it. Anytime we can pull on another scenario or role or example where things just work that way, because that's the way it's supposed to work. Yeah, exactly. I often pull on GC. Yeah.
Yeah, the general counsel can't say, well, the CEO said it was legal, so therefore it's legal. When you're the person who's supposed to be, through your whole legal organization, guiding a company to be legal. Doesn't mean that illegal things sometimes don't get, that happen because a rogue person does something and stuff like that. But your job is to ensure legal compliance and that the company's operating in an appropriate way legally. CFO, same thing, financial integrity. CISO, same thing, around not that you're eliminating the potential of a cybersecurity incident, that you, one, have a design goal, two, the integrity of not only your risk state as it sits today and your characterization of an incident that occurred is accurate, but your forward-looking view of risk has a level of objectivity with data and logic to back it. No different than a financial forecast.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I guess when there are questions for both the CFO or GC, they can point to Sarbanes-Oxley, or they could point to case law or something to say, yeah, but do we have that same ability as a CISO? I mean, we can point to other breaches, but
I've always assumed that ability. Other people are waiting and asking for permission. And if you're waiting and ask for permission, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. I just look at it literally from the day I landed in the role. I took it as if I was the CEO, CFO equivalent for everything related to information risk. Now, through that process, was I wrong a lot? You bet. Did I learn a lot? You bet. Will I continue to be wrong and learn? Yes. But that's also where, failure can come in. If I'm not willing to sometimes experience failure and a mistake of my opinion or my logic or my data, and I've done that multiple times, but I've then learned from that, recalibrated, and moved on. But where somebody couldn't give me logic or data to show that I was wrong, why would I ever budge?
Well, let me ask you this then, Malcolm, because I mean, I often put my program management hat on, where it's a different kind of risk, but I was responsible many years ago for bringing products to market. You're bringing a bunch of people together, a bunch of technology together, and a bunch of requirements together to pull something off. And in there is risk, right? Technology doesn't work the way it's supposed to, or the operating system doesn't provide a feature, or somebody built something wrong, or that there's a security vulnerability in the release that you don't want to let it fly. Lots of stuff. But as you're approaching a point where you understand those things, you understand that those risks might be there. There's a lot of ambiguity. And
Yes.
now, so for the CISO role, I think we have ambiguity, right? And we're marching toward our design goal as you describe it. Uh, how are we communicating it correctly? Do we understand it enough? Do we know where the holes are? To say this is where the ambiguity sits. This is where I'm making a decision based on less information that I'm comfortable with, but based on my peers, based on uh, examples from other organizations that we've seen get popped, whatever. I'm, to your point, putting my stake in the ground because my gut says and experience says that this hole that I see is probably going to get filled with X, Y, and Z, which will then lead me to that material impact. So
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
I
I
think
said a lot there, but thoughts on that?
yeah, well, I think there's a couple things. One, let's accept. Let's also talk about accepting risk and acceptable risk because they're two different things, right? Accepting risk is a business process; it's not a control. And when you accept risk, you're also implicitly accepting the responsibility to respond to it should it ever manifest itself. And a lot of risk decision makers don't really think that way, right? They go, we accepted that risk, and they move on as if because they accepted it, it's no longer something that could occur, right? And that's something that we've got to change in how we do risk acceptance, and then how we when we make a risk decision, that's not permanent. There's a temporal aspect to risk, right? So we accept it today, but there's a temporal nature to it. So the we should be revisiting some of those accepted risks over time, and when we don't, that's also where we fail, right? Because assumptions change, the world changes. So put that on the side. Now on this ambiguity around the risk, I think there's a lot of ways you can reduce the ambiguity, right? You go, okay, take Log4j, right? What, 2 years ago or whatever, big brouhaha, Log4j, oh my God, patch everything. CISA says this. SEC says if you don't do it, there's going to be liabilities. Everybody says, oh my God, pull themselves through knotholes. I talk to a lot of peers. They're like, we don't know where it is. We don't know how many instances we have. I don't know the context of Log4j in our environment. Spin around and around in circles for a week, 10 days, and they finally say, screw it, patch it all. Why? Because they didn't know where the instances of Log4j were in an attack path that would lead to an exploitable event that would cause an exposure, that would cause an oh shit moment and a material impact. Well, guess what? You can do that. You can do attack path mapping. You can understand the context of your environment in real time and know with precision where you have those exposures, and then be able to discuss them with people. And if they go, yep, we agree with it, we're okay with it, then you go, okay, great. We have an exposure to a potential materially impacting event. Now, if I'm a public company, guess what? I have to update my risk statements in the public filings. And if anything goes bump along that path, I've also got to now disclose it as a cyber incident. Okay, you can do that. I was doing that manually back at Intel years ago, and even at Silence, to some extent manually, but there's automation now that does that. The other aspect of this still becomes a little bit of the subjectivity. But again, you go, how do you reduce that? Well, go back to Sarbanes-Oxley, go back to financial materiality. There's line items in the balance sheet. There's line items there. Materiality by nature, materiality by impact. Walk back from the financials. Walk back from business processes and things that could affect the business or your customer. Once you understand that, then it's just, again, it's hard work, but it's not that hard to figure out. I was having this dialogue earlier, late last week, actually, around artificial intelligence, right? And people are going, wow, yeah, do I really need to have, protection on the AI models and ML models? And I said, well, despite the fact that public models, a lot of them are already poisoned. They're just, in some cases have malicious code in them. the tools that you're using for ML ops are compromised with remote code execution. So therefore, those tools then would allow an attacker to own the model and do all these things. And they know all that. And you give them all that data. But it's too early. I'm like, okay, let me give you an example. You're using artificial intelligence in your pharmaceutical company, and you're using it to figure out drug interactions to reduce health risk, and you say it's okay not to protect it. Okay, or you're using artificial intelligence. I was reading a couple of weeks ago, McKinsey had published a study, and in fact, I posted one the other day. They talked about AI changing the travel industry, $2 to $4 trillion worth of economic benefit. Okay, if I can create that much benefit through the use of AI, therefore I can create that much damage and maybe more. So therefore, if I'm claiming a benefit in the technology that's a material benefit to the organization, if I'm a public company, I now have the obligation to protect that capability. McKinsey did another one, Freeport McManaman, $1.5 billion of shareholder value by using AI in the mining operations. Okay, $1.5 billion. That sounds pretty material to me, right? So to me, it's not that hard. You just got to look at the financial flow and then go, well, what could be material by nature or material by impact? Map it out, and where systems and data could do that, that's where you make your stand.
So many things in my head, because I mean, you continuing to walk it back, you might say, well, it's only a handful of systems that really interact or generate this material value, right? And certain sets of data, certain apps. But then you look at a real network and you're like, yeah, this is just a big mess. It's all connected. You can't separate it.
It is, but this is where you have to have, well, I'll say the peanut butter spread of general controls and hygiene, right? But again, I'll give you an Intel example, and I've spoken about this for years. I still, at a macro level, because we started doing this in late 2001, what are the macro business processes that, if we're offline or had some major issue, would have a material impact to the business? Book, order, pay, build, ship, close, and communicate. Macro business processes. If I can't book an order, I miss revenue. Material impact. I can't ship a product, I miss revenue. Material impact. If I can't pay employees or suppliers, guess what? Material impact. But there's a temporal nature to this, right? Every business has a cadence of their quarter. Intel is an example. It's dated. It might be different. The last 2 weeks of the quarter, biggest shipping window, biggest revenue window. Well, guess what? If shipment is offline the first 2 weeks of the quarter, who gives a crap? Yeah, fix it, but it doesn't have the same level of materiality, because guess what? I can expedite the shipments and still hit my revenue number, right? Building a product, if I'm in the early part of the design cycle, right, and I'm designing something, that the time to revenue is several months out or year out, right? If I'm in tape out, revenue's closer. But if I'm at assembly test, that last mile of making a semiconductor before it gets shipped to Dell or somebody, that has the biggest impact on them, the biggest impact on me. But payroll, okay, payroll's offline. November 7th, it's offline. Who gives a crap? Payroll cycle is November 1st and November 15th. Doesn't matter if it's offline, right? Like I said, it's work, but that's what we should be doing. And that's when we fail, is when we haven't done that level of understanding of our business and understanding of risk.
So I think everybody's sitting in the roles thinking, yep, that part of the job sucks. I don't do it, or I don't do it well, or I don't do it often enough, right? They're all probably sitting there thinking something like that. or maybe they're narcissists and they said, well, I don't get support from the company. So let's in the last few minutes we have, because I think we touched on the industry and the individual quite a bit at this point. Let's talk about the company culture, and I think you referred to it as the inertia of the organization. um, where do things kind of fall down with respect to getting support from the business? Where do things fail for the role there?
So sometimes it actually is the CISO, because the CISO hasn't done that connecting of the dots. The daisy chain of endpoints and systems and data and network and all that stuff to the thing that matters to the business. Well, if you haven't done that work, of course the business isn't going to support you, particularly when you've asked for more and more and more and more and more, and then continue to do that, and then you continue to have all these issues,
But
right?
I'm going to guess that there are some people that say, I don't get the opportunity to do that. I'm told to buy a risk management tool and a bunch of controls and some protection, maybe outsource my response, and then present every quarter how well we're doing patching and keeping stuff from going awry. I don't get the chance to do that fancy work you're talking about, Malcolm. The company doesn't support me.
Okay, so well,
Is that
there
a
is
viable, a real?
there are in many circumstances, and I've talked to a lot of peers on this, where they've done all the work, they know what the risks are, they've had the discussions, they know they're underfunded in some areas, and the business still says, nope, we can't do it. Well, okay, you haven't failed. You just have to then document that the CEO, the CFO, and the general counsel and the board are okay with a material risk. Now, if you don't document that, then I think you failed. But sometimes the reality is businesses have challenges, right? I was at Intel where I had to do budget cuts and lay off people. Why? Because we missed revenue, right? Intel's gone through layoffs even recently. So every company, every organization has budget fluctuations. Your job is to deal with those budget fluctuations. Now, again, there are times where I know, and I've seen it, where a CIO, a CTO, another C-suite executive does not give a crap about security or privacy. They give lip service to it. Well, frankly, if you can't go around them, through them, over them, or somehow remove them as a path in your decision making, then I think you need to look for another job. But don't, again, water down the integrity of what you're doing. Now, again, in other situations, it's just, the business environment. You said you've had responsibility of being product to market. I'm a former finance guy supporting general managers and stuff like that. I don't know any business leader with a budget who's ever gotten all the funding, all the resources, and all the timeline they needed to achieve their objective, right? You're head of sales. Okay, you have a target to hit a sales goal. You have a sales cost of sales that you can hit, and stuff, and you're told to hit it, and you get creative, right? It no different from any. This is the thing that drives me nuts about what I'll say, the whining from some security practitioners. They go, "Well, I didn't get the budget." Well, okay, nobody ever gets the entire budget they want.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, you sell with fewer leads than you want, and less marketing collateral than you need.
Yeah, but that's the job.
You figure it
Nobody
out. You figure it
ever.
out. Yeah.
Why does the CISO get to have everything they want? I, that's just not a
Because we're
reality in any organization.
special, Arkham. We're special. Ah, boy. All right. Yeah, we're at 44 minutes here. Clearly we could keep going for ages. I want to save the liability piece. I'm going to pull together a conversation for that. So I'm going to invite you to join me for that with a few other folks. think it's going to be interesting, especially knowing that you have a particular view that may not be popular with,
Yeah.
with some of the
You
others.
know,
So that could be a fun conversation. But
yeah,
any quick thoughts on that while we're here?
yeah, well, I think, you can hear from my tone and my perspective and how I view the role similar to being a CFO. If you haven't done the role with integrity, you haven't reported actual events in a way that is honest and true, you haven't done your forecasting of risk honest and true, and you've swept stuff under the rug or manipulated the portrait of risk because of pressure, you deserve to be liable. Plain and simple in my mind. But go back to the success thing and failure thing. Winston Churchill had a really fantastic quote: "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. Sometimes it is, but it's the courage to continue that counts." Right? It- it- we're on a journey, but no finish line.
Yeah, and I was going to ask that because I mean, is it okay to fail? And I'm just thinking when the handcuffs come, no, it's not okay. But
Well,
but I mean, we often say you want to fail fast, learn from your mistakes, and move on. To your point, right? The courage to keep going. But when the penalties are severe, you don't want to fail. I
I,
wouldn't want to fail anyway.
I
Which
wouldn't
goes
want to
back to
fail. I
am I
wouldn't want
am
to
I not
fail.
wrong? Am I wrong for not wanting to be a CISO? No,
No,
even
well,
more so.
but again, it goes back to the CFO and other C-suite executives for financial integrity issues could be put in jail too. This is a financial integrity issue. It has been for almost 20 years, right? I'm glad enforcement actions are starting to take place. That will then hopefully drive a level of real accountability and real up leveling of the CISO role into a C-suite role for people that are capable and want to do it. And if they're not, don't take the role. But again, it just becomes one of those items of I think the challenge we've had with some of the charges. It's a shame that other executives have not been charged. That's I think the failure of some of the regulators to charge other executives as well.
Yep, yep. Well, I'm excited to have that conversation with you, and a few other folks. So I'm gonna get on that. I think it's gonna be an interesting chat. um, so loads of fun there. Anyway, Malcolm, always good. My mind's a little bent from all the fun stuff you just shared. I'm not a CISO, if you can figure that out. I'm intrigued by the role. I love risk management, so I can completely appreciate that. And even without a finish line, I can totally appreciate getting from current state to better state and better state and better state, kind of making progress. Not with all the budget because you never get it. To your point, um, and I can appreciate what folks have to go through as they try to walk that line that maybe they didn't have the opportunity to define their goals in the right way, or don't have the means to achieve those goals in the best way possible. But to your point, if you can keep your keep your head on you on yourself and keep things straight and keep your morals at the center of everything, then I think we're in better shape. I don't know if it'd be interesting to see if this impacts um, folks wanting to have the role. I have an inkling that it might, right? I don't know. We'll see.
Absolutely.
We'll see. All right. Well, we're not a failure in this role. We're continuing to learn. We make mistakes. I guess that's probably the better way to say it, right? Make a mistake and learn. Um,
Yep.
and set those design goals. I think that's the big takeaway for me. Take that time, connect those dots, and I think everything flows from there. So thanks, Malcolm. I don't know, any final thoughts from you before we wrap?
It's been great to have this discussion. And again, it's a tough role, and no different than any other executive role. And the complexity and the challenges of it are going to continue to grow. And the only way in which we'll mature ourselves and mature the role itself and codify it more in the industry is to have dialogues like this, and again, learn from each other's perspectives, learn from each other's mistakes, and recognize that having a mistake or a failure really only becomes what I'll say a catastrophic failure if you're not learning from it.
Yep. Yeah. Repeat the failure over and over. All right, Malcolm. Well, we'll leave it here. Lots for folks to chew on, certainly myself. And I'll include a link for those listening. I'll include a link to Malcolm's post. So go there, comment on your own what you think about Malcolm's position on the other LinkedIn post that inspired him to share, and which then drove this conversation. I think you mentioned another post you did too, so we'll include that here as well. And yeah, I mean, this is a topic that I'm sure lots of people have thoughts on. So I'd be surprised if we don't get some feedback somewhere socially on this. Anyway, so thanks everybody for listening. Be sure to stay tuned, share it with your friends and enemies, and subscribe so you can hear this and the next one we're going to have with Malcolm and a few other folks. So thanks again, Malcolm. Thanks everybody. Catch you on the next one.
Thanks, Sean.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSPmagazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.